Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Alexis Batulis with Columbus US, and today we have a special presentation for you on Power BI, getting started with analytics. We started the call by putting everyone on mute, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. Finally, we are recording this session and we'll be sending a link of the recording to all attendees within an hour after this webcast. Now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today, Stefan Sawecki. Stefan is an enterprise account executive here at Columbus. He partners with clients in the Eastern United States to help drive meaningful and practical digital transformation. His background includes roles focused on manufacturing and distribution, as well as a stint leading an IT organization. So without further ado, Stefan, I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be with you all today. As Alexis mentioned, this is Stefan Sawecki, and excited to really take you all through a topic here today that I think has incredible contemporary value, just kind of given where we all are with our businesses today. But being able to get started and really get into analytics and start to drive insight out of all of the data that we're capturing here today. So excited to be with you. Let's take a look at our agenda this afternoon. So before we get into really the nuts and bolts around Power BI, I'll take a minute and just tee us up from a current climate perspective. I found an article that I found really interesting and I thought gave some unique perspective to the discussion today. So we'll take a minute there just to set ourselves up, and then ultimately go through really the nuts and bolts of Power BI, how we can set things up, get you ultimately the visuals, the reports, the data, and the insights out that you guys need, and then talk about how we can collaborate across the organization, funnel all of those insights into dashboards, and then be able to take that next layer down and derive even further insights out of the solution to then really help you guys make the decisions that you need to drive the business forward. So, and as Alexis mentioned, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, I found an article just in thinking about today's discussion, and I thought it was fairly contemporary as we're talking about getting started with analytics, right? Because I think the lessons learned here out of obviously a very real and very contemporary situation from a COVID perspective, I think apply to all of us, regardless of our industry and really regardless of the business that we conduct. Ultimately, we're all trying to get better insight and better understanding of what's going on within our businesses, right? And I think, being able to tee that up to then move into a conversation on Power BI, that's really where I was thinking we would start today. So, there were 6 takeaways that I see really from a general guideline perspective are applicable not just from a COVID perspective, but really just in conducting business in general, and are really the foundation of how we build a successful analytics program. And first and foremost, beginning with the end in mind, right? So the old adage there. So the analytics need to be aligned with business priorities. And I invite you guys all to check out this article. I've shared it out on LinkedIn earlier today. Some of the data in there is pretty staggering in the sense that, of the survey that McKinsey took here, only 30% of the businesses that responded actually said that their analytics strategy is aligned to their corporate strategy. And if we're not beginning with that end in mind, where are we going? We're sort of just a rudderless ship in that instance. So being able to have that clear line of sight and understand where we're trying to take the business allows us to then manipulate and shape the data that we want to interact with to ultimately help us get the insight and the decision-making power that we need to. And then being able to adopt a broader analytics strategy helps break down a lot of those functional silos, right? So having a holistic analytics approach allows people from marketing to manufacturing really to coalesce around the singular vision of the enterprise and be able to have a single source of truth for all of the data and all of the action that's occurring within the business to be able to make the decisions that you need to. So I think the outcome of this McKinsey study ultimately is that some of those silos maybe aren't as rigid as they appear, specifically when you're able to adopt more of a broader strategy here. Agile is absolutely top of mind. We're seeing it across all of our practices, being able to get to value quickly, right? Not have these monolithic projects that can take significant investments of time before you're seeing value out of them. And I think analytics as a discipline and as a topic really fits incredibly well into that from an agile perspective, right? We can take, if you take one of the topics on the right-hand side here, engaging our customers or managing supply chains, right? We can take a subset of that and very, very quickly as practitioners in the space, be able to ultimately answer questions that we could not before and get value in weeks, not months, not years for our organizations. And in many cases, hours or days, depending on the scope of the questions that we're trying to solve. So very, very quick to be able to get the return on that. And then ultimately, empowering your teams to be able to then take that information and run with it, understanding that the data is not going to be perfect. We try really, really hard to get clean data into the system, but being able to work with the data that you have and make the best decisions based on that, and ultimately serve up the best insights from that perspective. And then from a technology perspective, as we'll spend the time today really talking about, not trying to reinvent the wheel, leveraging powerful out-of-the-box solutions to really support this initiative is going to be mission critical. So I thought, that for a group of folks that are thinking about, getting started with analytics, I think the lessons sort of apply from this article into some of the other pieces that we'll be spending the rest of the time talking about today. So a quick primer on Power BI. So what is Power BI? I think, a lot of us perhaps have heard the term or at least have a cursory familiarity with it, but by and large, it's part of Microsoft's Power Platform, and it is the analytics, the insight, the visualization engine for our data, by and large. So within Power BI, you do have multiple components, and I think it merits taking a moment to describe really what each of those are, because they do come together to form the complete solution. But desktop version Power BI is really where we see a lot of power users gravitating, right? So the more data sources that you have, the more complexity around sort of data modeling and things like that, you'll have your power users leveraging Power BI Desktop. Power BI Service, certainly you can slice and dice and manipulate your data, but that is I think really a front end for consuming a lot of the dashboards, reports, and visualizations that are existing within your workspaces and within your ecosystem, right? So depending on the size of your organization, really how you guys are organized, sometimes we'll see folks where they would have a handful of folks with desktop, and then the vast majority of the folks leveraging the service, right? So think that you have some data scientists or some analytics focused individuals, maybe an A&BI team, those folks would be cooking up different visuals that ultimately the service team or the folks leveraging the Power BI service could consume. Not to say that you can't edit and change things in Power BI service, you certainly can, but I think the more complex and the more pulling together and coalescing of different data sources that you want to be able to do, the better off you are in desktop. And then ultimately mobile becomes the front end for wherever data access, right? So on your device, with you wherever you need to go, really able to still check in and have your finger on the pulse of the business, regardless of where you may be. So certainly a right tool for right job type of approach, but they do all come together to really form the ecosystem that is Power BI. I think the big question for today, ultimately, how do we get started? How do we get in and start to get value out of analytics? So very practically here first, right? So I would recommend you start with a download of Power BI Desktop, be able to pull the data from different data sources. And one of the real advantages of Power BI is that there are a number of pre-built integrators out to almost any data source that you guys would want to pull data from. And it is a very intuitive process to make those connections, right? So there's a lot of sort of guidance, guardrails, things like that built into the system to help you get those pieces and parcels together. And then ultimately adjust the data as you need, right? So whether you're using Power Query Editor or any number of other tools, you can shape the data, right? And really refine what you need to be able to get answers to those questions that you're looking to get, right? And then so at a high level, this is really sort of fundamentals of Power BI there, right? Once you've got this, then we can start to move on to the additional bells and whistles that are included within the Power BI stack. Okay, so and as I mentioned, some of those pre-built connectors here, right? So within Power BI, I've got an example here around Google Analytics where you can actually pull up right from within Power BI the apps, make that connection to Google Analytics, and then there are actually scenarios that come pre-populated out of the box. And obviously this is more of an organic web traffic metric here that we're looking at, right? And new daily users, some of those other pieces, but think of these as jumping off points, right? So you have these scenarios that are available to you out of the box. Obviously the data connectors are there and it exists so that you don't have to spend your time making those calls and connections. And then ultimately you can focus on the analysis, right? So a lot of times when we're talking with folks, we're seeing a shift from sort of core blocking and tackling of making a lot of the technical connections and seeing folks really moving up into more of an analyst role. And I think Power BI fits very, very well in sort of supporting that motion where people are really driving towards being enablers of the business and ultimately helping with the business decision making. And a little bit of a teaser up there, we've got the ask a question about the data on this dashboard. We'll talk about the Power BI Q&A functionality in a bit. So probably one of the biggest reasons that people come to Power BI is it is well regarded as the best, if not the best, one of the best solutions for visualizing your data, right? So there are a lot of options out there in the marketplace that can pull data together, but I think the ease and the flexibility and really the ability to then collaborate and share the data, the outputs of what you get, are really top notch within Power BI, right? So you've got the concept of reports where that's your canvas for building those visuals, right? That's where you're designing what those outputs look like. Tons of different options there, right? And obviously the old save your work. I mean, certainly that is topical and important here. You've got the chance to make lots of different edits and save frequently would be my guidance there. But just from an overall structure perspective here on the right side, right? I think understanding how the different pieces play together is important. So a dashboard, which a lot of people think of as the output for Power BI, and rightly so, typically is actually a conglomeration of a number of different reports. And as you can see here from the visual, that can be different reports pulling data from vastly different sources, right? You may have a CRM system. You may have Excel data source. You may have data warehouses. You may have multiple ERP systems, right? And regardless of where you are on the broader digital transformation conversation, right? You need to be able to operate the business holistically and see things holistically right now. And Power BI with this type of framework, with this type of architecture, really helps to support that, right? So pulling together various data sources and various different reports, dropping them onto a singular dashboard that either you can consume or you could publish out to various members of your team to all be operating from the same visual space as you proceed down the path. And certainly, a little bit of stealing my own thunder a bit, but talking about sharing and collaboration there, really critical and core to what Power BI can do through the Power BI service, right? So, it is simply a situation where you can publish the various reports that you're building from right within your home tab, share those either within different workspaces, or even there are other ways as well where you can share specific reports that people can have access to them directly within Power BI, or you can share them in the sense that people receive links or embedded reports to them via email, if that is their preferred method for consuming the reports. So if there's some, a data set or a report that folks really just need the static data for, that happens. Certainly, think about the best consumption mechanism for that to make it easiest for your end users ultimately to grab that data. And from that perspective, the more you share within the service, the easier that collaboration can be, right? We can add things like comments and store a lot of that information so that the dialogue is now occurring right side by side with the data, as opposed to more of the traditional kind of drop it out to Excel and everybody's got their own view and then we make changes and now what's the right version, right? So as much as we can, we're avoiding that, and we're trying to keep everything within the BI service, and thankfully it's a pretty intuitive way to interact with the data, so that is much less of a struggle than it used to be. So let's talk about dashboards more specifically, right? So you can build different dashboards, charts, graphs, again, pulling from a vast library of different reports that you create or are out of the box, pulling together different data sets, and then we'll spend a few moments on insights shortly, but think of that as really the system starting to quote unquote get smart, right? And learn and serve up some of that information to you, as opposed to you having to constantly prompt the system. So we'll talk about that shortly. But dashboards are viewable, as you can see, both on the Power BI service as well as the mobile footprint. So you can take those dashboards with you and have the key decision-making criteria regardless of where you are ultimately within your stack. And then building dashboards, very, very straightforward. It's a pinning process and the ability to really add whichever elements you want, slice, dice, manipulate, move around, etc. But you've always got that opportunity then to drill further right from within those dashboards. So a lot of times what we'll do when we're working with clients is we might have sort of role-based dashboards that we're working on, right? So if we're a production planner, we've got that sort of view of the world, and maybe there's a little bit of quality data, a little bit of the sales forecast coming in, a number of different data sources that are coming in that we can pull in and holistically provide that view of the world to our clients. So, and then a few examples here around, what some of the dashboards may look like, and ultimately creating dashboards here. So, this an example that we're using here around best states for sunglass sales, right? So some of the questions that you can ultimately ask of the system and then get that data out of it. But, we've got a number of different visual elements here. So top 10 weather states, top 10 affordable states, all of those really starting their lives as different reports, right? Sort of in isolation. But then we can pull those all on here onto a single visual pane, and then be able to really have that cross section of the different data elements we need to be able to answer the questions that we need to for the business, right? And then again, from within here, we can manipulate the visuals. Maybe perhaps a bar chart isn't the right format for this, or we want to overlay different data elements here, as you can see on the chart on the top right. So very, very flexible in terms of how we ultimately render this end information for our folks. And then again, the ability to drill down and really get to underlying data here quickly is really the hallmark of Power BI in general. And then I include this here. This is a report that we have built out, and just as an example, really, of some of the things that you can do. So this is something that we we've pulled together from a production quality perspective. And again, today we're talking about sort of getting started with analytics. This gets into some machine learning and some predictive analytics as well. So, let's crawl, walk, run, but ultimately just an understanding of really where you can take things, where we're analyzing different production orders and the items associated with them, and actually scoring the risk associated with those various production orders to say, what is the likelihood that we're going to have a non-conformance event associated with this, right? And it might be, factoring based on the start time or the BOM complexity or some of the different data elements that ultimately come together to form a given production order, right? But we at least know now, kind of given this and understanding that this is constantly being updated, what do I really need to keep an eye on here? And I feel like that's how we drive towards managing by exception, right? I think that's the holy grail for a lot of us. We want to automate as much as we can, right? So a lot of these low items, yeah, certainly we're going to execute on them. We're going to maintain our process discipline. But if we have to take our production focus, or our team's focus in this case, and understand where do we want to really spend the time thinking about process improvement, or what are the potential risk factors? What are the trends common across of those? This starts to give us the data to power some of those discussions. And this is, again, another visualization of a similar concept here, right? So what's really driving a lot of that non-conformance, right? And you'll see here on sort of the upper center portion here, the NCR by BOM line count, as you might expect, right? The more complex our BOMs are, the higher likelihood we're going to have a non-conformance, right? So does that impact really how we structure things? Does that impact how we schedule production? Those are some of the questions that you can start to address here. And again, all of this out of the box within Power BI that you guys can take advantage of with this tool set, and then start to drive questions to those answers for yourselves. And I do think it's worth noting here, right? So today's session, kind of giving everybody the getting started approach. We're going to have in a week's time what we call a dashboard in the day session. And that is, as you can see here, 11 to 4 Eastern, very much a deep dive in the software, actually building out specific dashboards. And I will say we had one of these sessions about a month or so ago, and incredibly well received, where folks were really stepping away from there with enhancements to their skill set, ideas around different ways they could apply it to their business. And I do think that if this is something that you are thinking about or looking to really refine your skill set in, this is a good investment of time. And I think Alexis will share that link out with the team, or excuse me, with the group here as we're wrapping up the session. So I think, in addition to the recording, you guys will have access to this, and you can certainly check it out on our social feeds and all of those types of things. Okay, so drilling into your data, right? So obviously we're going to serve up a number of reports, visualizations, dashboards. Now I need to take what I'm seeing and get to that next layer underneath to really understand root cause around a lot of these pieces, right? So that's something that Power BI sets up very well for, right? So you've got the opportunity to get those instant insights and understand what the data is telling you, right? But I think the big takeaway, the big win for Power BI, and really where things like AI and machine learning and statistical algorithms and all of those pieces really start to pay off, is when a solution like Power BI is generating insights for you to say, hey, steer your attention over here, right? We're seeing these 5 things happen, and the last time those 5 things happened, we saw results like this. And start to serve some of that up for you, right? So maybe that's things like category outliers, big time consideration when it comes to things like forecasting, right? So are these items that, is this demand normal, or is this a spike? And that we need to really sort of smooth out or remove because there was a specific promotion or there was a specific sales initiative that we undertook. And ultimately, we don't want to plan for that going forward, right? And then similarly, correlations, right? If this, then that type scenarios. And then also trend analysis, right? Is the overall trend across this item or sales channel or whatever the case may be, is it upward, downward, velocity, those types of things, right? So you can start to really get additional insight out of it. And those, that tool set, the quick insights, all of those pieces, that lives within Power BI natively. That's not something that's that you guys need to necessarily set up or monitor specifically to get that output, right? The system will be monitoring the data and the trends and all of those things, and ultimately look to serve a lot of that up for you. So, and here is an example, right? So we've got a market share year-on-year change graph here that we're looking at, and then again, letting the insights panel on the right side here show us where we, in this case, might have some specific outliers that we want to either be aware of or at least be considering as we are thinking about, you know, the overall footprint of this data, right? So being able to really tee that up for us so that we're not having to do all of that heavy lifting on our own, I think is really where more and more of the systems in general are going to, but certainly from an analytics perspective, being able to serve up to the point of human judgment is really where we're seeing the trend go across Power BI. And then similarly, right? So things like seasonality from a forecast perspective, or in this case, you know, this is more of an e-com or a download driven metric here, where we're looking at the number of downloads of a given item over time, and then we can start to see, you know, seasonally, yes, we've got a general uptrend, but we also see sort of in that January timeframe, hey, things really do spike up. What's causing that, right? And that gives us an opportunity to drill into that data and see, is that something that we're doing, or is there something that we could even capitalize on further to take those spikes from maybe 10K to 15K, and we drive even higher traffic ultimately, if that's what we're trying to drive towards. So the Q&A feature, this is actually something that we use pretty frequently here at Columbus for ourselves, where you actually can ask real English or real world formulated questions to Power BI, and it will go about finding those answers for you. So instead of needing to know specific coding to try to get around to an answer, you've got an opportunity to say, and I'll pick, you know, an overly simplistic example here for illustration, but, you know, which geography or which of my sales regions are really driving the most traffic to our website this month, right? Something like that, where ultimately you don't need to be able to know that I need to pull this data element from this table, this data element from this is an external data source, here's from Google Analytics. If we've already got that data coming into the system, Power BI can start to put together those maps and help us answer those questions. And then furthermore, as we talked about with the insights, Power BI can start to suggest questions about what it's seeing with the data. And, you know, maybe that's a different rendering of the visual, right? So, you know, there's a lot there really sort of underlying the technology that ultimately can help us do our jobs better. And again, we want to be able to let the technology work for us. And I think that's, you know, a critical way that Microsoft has embedded a lot of that intelligence into the solution to help us ultimately get more out of it. And, you know, I'll use this here as an example, right? So you can see the ask a question about your data up at the top. You know, classic sort of opportunity analysis dashboard here. If you've got, you know, a structured sales team, sales regions, you know, sales process, you're going to have a lot of these sort of data points here, right? But very common that you're going to ask a question or think about things maybe in a way that sort of splits these different data sets, right? So, you know, as I mentioned, sort of maybe it's driving web traffic, or maybe it's driving web orders, or whatever the case may be, right? As we all sort of pivot and back to the initial thoughts around some of the lessons from COVID, right? We're all trying to pivot, get more agile, get more customer centric. The ability to leverage a solution like this and ask real questions of the data and get answers ultimately is a game changer, in the sense that we're not having to cook up these complex reports every single time. Ultimately, once the data is there and we're giving the system some burn-in time to kind of learn, we can really start to ask pretty sophisticated questions here around what is driving our success, so that we ultimately can go and replicate it or expand it, or sort of replicate it elsewhere, those types of things, right? So give yourself that opportunity to really drive transformation in the business. So let's shift gears slightly here, and then we'll touch on a few use cases as well, and then we'll make sure we leave some time for questions. But the data journey as a concept is one that we are having with all of our clients virtually every time we're talking, because the nature of business is changing so quickly today that people are accumulating volumes and volumes of data, and they're really trying to A, make sense of it, B, put in a framework that ultimately allows them to take advantage of all of this data that they're gathering, because data is more and more becoming a competitive advantage. And not just data, but specifically the ability to leverage data, see through the noise in data, and ultimately drive the future state, right? So I think, for the last 10, 15 plus years, we've all been thinking about business intelligence, right? So reports, dashboards, and all of those things. And certainly Power BI is a very capable solution for that. But I think it's important to ultimately understand where we can take something like Power BI, so that as we're building our roadmap and going from getting started to really being optimized, how we can get there. And I think that beyond sort of standard reports and then that query drill down function, we're seeing a lot of folks really moving to that sort of fourth phase of alerts, right? So prompting, and that's where the insights and the Q&A and those other pieces within Power BI are coming into play. But I think it's important, critically important, for you guys to know that that same interface, those same visuals, that same tool set also has embedded within it the ability to be more forward looking, right? So historically, reporting is going to tell us what happened. It's the rear view mirror. Now, we certainly can drive a lot of insight and action from it, but ultimately, how can we take that and spin that forward, right? So in recent times, certainly it's been a lot of statistical analysis and forecasting, but Power BI is also ready and enabled to help us with predictive analytics and then ultimately optimization, right? So answering a lot of the toughest questions that we need to answer in business, Power BI already has the underpinnings for, so that yes, today we're really talking about getting started, but it's not too far of a leap to get to those pieces, right? And because we're able to do it in an agile way, we can focus on really what are the highest value targets within our business and be able to drive that forward much more quickly than we used to be able to do, and move it towards more of a data science, advanced analytics, optimized perspective to drive that business value for ourselves. So circling back to really where we started here today, how Power BI can really drive a lot of these pieces. I mean, I think from a silo perspective, the fact that we can pull data from really any number of sources into a singular view, serve that up to our end users. I mean, truly functional silos are not as rigid as they appear. From an agility and organizational agility perspective, the fact that we can stand these pieces up within hours and days, not months and years, means that we can get to answering those questions much, much more quickly. And then because we're doing that and we're rolling that out to our teams, and the interface and the experience is much more intuitive. It's going to give our teams much more confidence around making those decisions, right? And then ultimately, from a leadership perspective, having confidence that our team is going to have what they need to make the right decisions. And then, the whole concept of being comfortable with data imperfections, Power BI through a lot of the underlying technologies as well, the AI, the machine learning, the various algorithms that are in there can actually help smooth a lot of those pieces out as well and fill in some gaps for us. And that's maybe more of the dashboard in the day type concept, but those pieces are there, and that's certainly worth exploring for you. And then ultimately reaction time, I think that all ties back to the agility concept, but how do we get from where we are today to where we need to go as quickly as possible? I think the short answer is we just need to start, right? And I think the thing is COVID, in a lot of ways, has shined a magnifying glass on a lot of that, right? So from that perspective, I think analytics, just kind of given the climate and where we are and all of those types of things, I think makes a lot of sense for people to look at for quick near-term wins to drive tangible results for the business. And whether that's supply chain, your employees, your financial decisions, or getting closer to your customer, I think those are all different pillars that come together to really form the business. But at the same time, because of the way that the solutions are architected and the questions can be answered and the structure to which you can build, you can attack those in any which way really makes sense for you. So I think that's a key takeaway here as we go. So where do we go from here, right? So I talked about dashboard in a day on June 9th. That's really meant to be a deep dive session where we're hands-on in the software, much more of a training, and you would leave that session with some tangible Power BI outputs that you could go and take to work right away. We're working on Power Apps in a day. So if you're familiar with the broader Power Platform, of which Power BI is a part, we're going to be doing a similar concept around Power Apps a bit later in June. Certainly invite you all to connect with our team, whether that's LinkedIn. We're doing a lot from a blog perspective. We're putting a lot of thoughts out there on Dynamics World as well, specifically on a lot of this analytics and BI, and really how data can be an enabler and a competitive advantage for people. And then ultimately, as I mentioned before, it's start the journey, right? So the thing about Power BI, I think a lot of folks who've been in the industry can pick up on it and start pretty quickly. We do have standard packs that we can deliver as well. So that's something that you'd want to talk about with your appropriate account rep, but also data journey assessments, right? So we work with a lot of clients around that entire data journey and identify, hey, here's where you are today. Some portions of your business are kind of a level 2, some portions are a level 3. How do we get you to a level 5 or a level 6? And I think just that understanding and visibility, kind of shining a light on that journey, can be very, very helpful as well. So with that, I will pause. Questions, comments, anything that we can address here today. And Alexis, maybe I'll point to you. Yeah, if you want to pull up the.
We'll give a minute and see.
Yeah, no
Please
problem.
enter your questions. Oh, yeah, I do see a hand was raised, so please enter your question in the chat box.
And while that's happening, I will say, as I mentioned at the top, I think for anybody who's thinking about sort of the analytics journey here, I would highly recommend that McKinsey article. As I said, I shared it out on LinkedIn earlier. Happy to connect there with anybody and have some discussions. But I think it's a bit of an eye opener because, as I mentioned, I think a lot of folks maybe are predisposed to thinking that initiatives like this will take months to get value, and that's just not what we've been seeing. And I think candidly the McKinsey piece validates a lot of that, where the timetable is weeks to see value out of these types of endeavors. So
all right, we do have a couple comments here thanking you, Stefan. People seem to Be very
Well, thank
appreciative
you.
here. And I think with that, we can go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much,
Yep.
Stefan, for giving us
Sure.
a great overview of Power BI getting started with analytics. We hope to see you all at our upcoming Dashboard in a Day workshop. We have more offerings coming up later this month, like Stefan said earlier today. So you can check out our other virtual offerings through the link provided in the chat box. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to our contact email, us-marketing@columbusglobal.com. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care, everyone. Thanks.